The rifle range fell silent as Staff Sergeant Maria Santa stepped up to the firing line, her hands steady despite the weight of every doubtful stare burning into her back. In 18 months, she would shatter the Army Ranger School's 12-mile Ruck march record by 7 minutes, carrying a 35-pound pack through Georgia's brutal terrain faster than any candidate in the program's 70-year history. But right now, standing at 5'3" with barely 120 pounds on her frame, she was just another soldier trying to prove she belonged in a world designed for giants. The morning sun cast long shadows across Fort Campbell's training grounds as Maria adjusted her grip on the M4 carbine. Around her, the other soldiers in Alpha Company shifted restlessly, some checking their watches, others whispering among themselves. The whispers weren't new. They'd followed her from basic training through advanced individual training, and now, into her current assignment with the 101st Airborne Division. Always the same questions, always the same doubts. Think she can even hold that rifle steady? Muttered Specialist Brooks from somewhere behind her. His voice carried just enough volume to be heard, but not enough to warrant official notice. It was a calculated insult, the kind that had become background noise in Maria's military career. 50. Buck says she doesn't qualify, came another voice. This one belonging to Private Chun, a recent arrival who'd made it his mission to question Maria's presence in their unit. Look at those arms. My little sister could probably outshoot her. Maria blocked out the commentary and focused on her breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Her father had taught her that technique during hunting trips in the mountains of Colorado, back when she was 8 years old and had to stand on a crate to see over the brush. Back then, the deer didn't care about her size. They only cared about precision. Santos. Drill Sergeant Williams barked from his position behind the firing line. His voice cut through the morning air like a blade, silencing the whispered conversations. You're up. Show us what the Air Force taught you before you decided to join a real branch. The comment drew chuckles from some of the soldiers. Maria had spent 4 years as an Air Force Security Forces specialist before cross-training into the Army, a decision that had raised eyebrows and generated skepticism from day one. Air Force personnel were often viewed as soft by their Army counterparts, and Maria's transition hadn't helped her credibility. She shouldered the rifle and peered through the scope, her world narrowing to the target 300 meters downrange. Everything else faded away, the heat, the noise, the doubt radiating from the soldiers around her. Her breathing steadied as she found her natural respiratory pause, that brief moment between exhale and inhale when the body naturally stills. The first shot broke clean, punching through the target's center ring with surgical precision. Maria cycled the bolt and fired again, her movements smooth and mechanical. 10 rounds, 10 shots, each one finding its mark with the kind of consistency that came from years of dedicated practice. When the firing ceased, Williams walked downrange to examine her target. The silence stretched long enough for Maria to hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. Finally, Williams returned, his weathered face giving nothing away. 47 out of 40 possible points, he announced to the group. The score was nearly perfect, missing perfection by only 3 points due to environmental factors beyond any shooter's control. Several soldiers shifted uncomfortably, their earlier confidence suddenly seeming misplaced. Lucky wind, Brooks muttered, but his voice lacked conviction now. Williams fixed him with a stare that could have melted steel. Brooks, you're up next. Let's see if you can match that luck. The challenge in his voice was unmistakable. Brooks stepped to the line with considerably less swagger than he'd shown moments earlier. His shooting, while adequate, fell well short of Maria's performance. Chun fared even worse, struggling with the wind conditions that Maria had seemed to read effortlessly. As the qualification continued, Maria maintained her position at the top of the scores. But she knew that marksmanship, while important, was only one small piece of the larger puzzle. In the Army, and especially in the elite units she dreamed of joining, physical capability often mattered more than technical skill. After the range exercise, Alpha Company moved to the physical training area for their weekly fitness assessment. The Army Combat Fitness Test had replaced the old push-up and sit-up focused evaluation, emphasizing functional movement and combat-relevant strength. For Maria, it represented both an opportunity and a constant challenge. The test began with the 3-repetition maximum deadlift. Maria approached the barbell loaded with 140 pounds, the minimum weight required for her age and gender category. Around her, male soldiers were lifting anywhere from 180 to 240 pounds, their superior size and natural strength advantages on full display. She gripped the bar and lifted, her form textbook perfect despite the relative lightness of the weight. The lift felt solid, controlled, professional. But she could see the looks from her fellow soldiers, not impressed, just acknowledging that she'd met the bare minimum standard. The standing power throw came next, requiring her to hurl a 10-pound medicine ball backward over her head for maximum distance. Maria's throw traveled 8 meters, respectable for her size, but significantly shorter than the 12 and 13-meter throws produced by her male counterparts. Hand-release push-ups followed, and here Maria found more solid ground. Her smaller frame actually worked to her advantage, allowing her to complete the repetitions with greater ease and better form than some of the larger soldiers, who struggled with their own body weight. The sprint drag carry event tested functional strength and agility across multiple movement patterns. Maria attacked each station with focused intensity, her Air Force background in security operations having prepared her well for varied physical challenges. She finished in the middle of the pack, a solid performance that earned grudging nods from soldiers who'd expected her to struggle. The leg tuck, hanging from a pull-up bar and bringing her knees to her elbows repeatedly, showcased Maria's core strength. Years of rock climbing in Colorado had given her exceptional grip strength and abdominal control, allowing her to complete more repetitions than several soldiers twice her size. The final event, a 2-mile run, played to one of Maria's greatest strengths. Her lightweight frame and exceptional cardiovascular conditioning, developed through years of high-altitude training in the Rocky Mountains, allowed her to maintain a pace that left larger soldiers gasping in her wake. She crossed the finish line in 13th place overall and second among all soldiers in her age category regardless of gender. Williams reviewed the scores with his characteristic stoic expression. Santos, overall score of 487. That puts you in the significant category. He paused, looking up from his clipboard. Not bad for someone who supposedly doesn't belong here. The comment was pointed, clearly directed at the soldiers who'd been questioning Maria's capabilities. But Maria knew that one good fitness test wouldn't silence all the doubts. If anything, it might intensify the scrutiny. After the formal assessment, the company moved into squad-level training exercises. These scenarios tested not just individual capability, but leadership, decision-making, and the ability to function effectively as part of a team. For Maria, they represented some of her greatest challenges. The first exercise involved casualty evacuation under simulated fire. Teams of 4 soldiers had to move a wounded teammate, represented by a 180-pound dummy, across 200 meters of rough terrain while under imaginary enemy fire. The emphasis was on speed, efficiency, and maintaining unit cohesion under stress. Maria found herself teamed with Brooks, Chun, and Specialist Davidson, a quiet soldier from Tennessee who generally kept his opinions to himself. The dynamics were immediately apparent. Brooks assumed leadership despite Maria's superior rank, and Chun made no effort to hide his skepticism about her ability to contribute meaningfully to the exercise. "Okay," Brooks began, "Davidson, and I will handle the carry. Chun, you take point. Santos." He paused, clearly struggling with what role to assign her. You can cover our 6. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The arrangement was tactically sound, but also transparently designed to minimize Maria's involvement in the heavy lifting. She could have asserted her rank and demanded a more central role, but that would have created unnecessary conflict and potentially compromised the team's performance. The exercise began with Chun moving forward to scout the route while Brooks and Davidson prepared to lift the dummy. Maria took her assigned position, scanning behind them for imaginary threats while keeping one eye on the overall tactical situation. 50 meters into the movement, Davidson stumbled on the uneven ground. The dummy's weight, combined with his momentary loss of balance, created a gap in their formation that threatened to expose the entire team. Without hesitation, Maria dropped her rearguard position and moved forward to stabilize the carry. "I've got him," she called out, shouldering part of the dummy's weight despite being significantly smaller than either of the assigned carriers. Her intervention allowed Davidson to regain his footing and maintain their forward momentum. Brooks shot her a look that mixed annoyance with grudging appreciation. He'd wanted to minimize her role, but her quick thinking had prevented what could have been a mission failure. They completed the exercise in respectable time, finishing in the upper third of all teams. During the after-action review, Williams specifically noted Maria's situational awareness and willingness to adapt her role based on changing circumstances. "Leadership isn't always about being the biggest or strongest person on the team," Williams told the assembled soldiers. "Sometimes it's about recognizing what needs to be done and doing it, regardless of what your assigned role might be." The comment was clearly directed at the entire company, but Maria felt several sets of eyes turned toward her. Some were curious. Others remained skeptical, but she sensed a subtle shift in how she was being perceived. The afternoon brought urban warfare training in the mock village that Fort Campbell had constructed for realistic combat scenarios. The exercise involved clearing buildings, securing areas, and protecting civilian populations, all skills that would be essential in modern combat environments. Maria's team was assigned to clear a 3-story building suspected of housing enemy combatants. The scenario required careful coordination, precise movement, and the ability to make split-second decisions under pressure. Her smaller size, which had been viewed as a liability in strength-based exercises, suddenly became a tactical advantage. "Santos, you take point on the stairwell," Brooks directed, his earlier reluctance to utilize her capabilities seemingly diminished by her performance in the earlier exercise. "Your profile gives us better concealment angles." The building clearing went smoothly, with Maria's Air Force security background proving invaluable in the tight spaces and complex sightlines of urban combat. She moved with practiced efficiency, her weapon control and room-clearing techniques drawing approving nods from the exercise observers. As the day's training concluded, Maria found herself reflecting on the persistent challenges she faced. Every success seemed to require twice the effort of her male counterparts, and every mistake was amplified and scrutinized. The path to elite units like the Rangers seemed impossibly steep, but her determination remained unshaken. Williams approached her as she cleaned her weapon at the end of the day. "Santos, got a minute?" She looked up from her cleaning kit, curious about what the drill sergeant might want to discuss privately. "You did good work today," Williams began, his tone more conversational than his usual bark. "But I need to ask you something directly. What's your ultimate goal here? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Maria considered the question carefully. Williams had a reputation for straight talk, and she sensed that her answer would carry weight beyond this single conversation. "I want to serve in special operations," she said finally. "Rangers, specifically. I know how that sounds given my size, but I believe I have the skills and determination to succeed." Williams studied her face, looking for signs of doubt or uncertainty. Finding none, he nodded slowly. "The Ranger pipeline is brutal," he said. "Not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. They'll push you harder than anything you've experienced so far. The failure rate is astronomical, even for soldiers who seem perfectly suited for the program." "I understand that, Drill Sergeant." "Do you?" Williams challenged. "Because understanding it intellectually and living it are two very different things. You'll be competing against soldiers who outweigh you by 50 or 60 pounds. You'll be carrying the same equipment loads, covering the same distances, meeting the same time standards. There won't be any allowances made for your size or gender." Maria met his gaze steadily. "I wouldn't want there to be." Williams smiled for the first time since she'd known him. "That's the right answer. But wanting it and achieving it are two different things. You're going to need to get stronger, faster, and tougher than you've ever been. You're going to need to prove yourself not just to the instructors, but to every soldier who thinks you don't belong there. How do I start? First, you need to max every physical standard, not just meet them. Rangers don't accept good enough. Second, you need to volunteer for every challenging assignment that comes available. Build a reputation for reliability and excellence. Third," he paused, looking around to ensure they weren't being overheard, "you need to find someone who's been through the program and can mentor you. Someone who understands what you're up against." As Williams walked away, Maria felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The path ahead would be more challenging than anything she'd attempted, but for the first time since arriving at Fort Campbell, she felt like someone in authority believed she might actually have a chance. That night, as she lay in her bunk listening to the steady breathing of her sleeping roommates, Maria began planning her transformation. She would need to redesign her training regimen, seek out additional challenges, and prepare herself for a level of scrutiny and difficulty that would test every aspect of her character. The whispers and doubts would continue, she knew. Brooks and Chun weren't likely to become supporters overnight, and there would always be new skeptics ready to question her presence in their ranks. But Williams' words had given her something she'd been lacking, a roadmap forward, and the beginning of institutional support. Outside her window, Fort Campbell continued its 24-hour cycle of activity. Somewhere in the darkness, future Rangers were already training, pushing themselves beyond normal human limits in pursuit of their goals. Soon, Maria promised herself she would join their ranks. The journey would be brutal, but she was ready. To begin, the weight room at Fort Campbell buzzed with the constant clank of iron and the rhythmic huffing of soldiers pushing their physical limits. Maria arrived each morning at 0445, 30 minutes before the official PT formation, to work on the weaknesses that kept her awake at night. The barbell loaded with 185 pounds seemed to mock her as she approached the squat rack, knowing that most of the Rangers she hoped to join could handle that weight for warm-up sets. Sergeant, First Class Marcus Rodriguez spotted her from across the gym. At 6'2" and 200 pounds of lean muscle, Rodriguez was everything Maria wasn't: big, strong, and already wearing the coveted Ranger tab on his left shoulder. More importantly, he was Williams' suggested mentor, a veteran of 3 Ranger deployments who had agreed to help prepare her for the impossible. "Your form's getting better," Rodriguez observed as Maria completed her third set of squats, her legs trembling with exhaustion. "But you're still thinking too much about the weight. Rangers don't get to think about whether something's heavy. They just move it." Maria racked the bar and wiped sweat from her forehead. "Easy for you to say. This weight probably feels like a warm-up to you." "Wrong attitude," Rodriguez corrected sharply. "Size isn't the limitation you think it is. I've seen 140-pound Rangers carry wounded soldiers twice their weight out of combat zones. The body can do incredible things when the mind stops making excuses." He gestured toward the pull-up bars, where several soldiers were struggling through their morning routines. "Watch Thompson over there. Guy's built like a linebacker, probably benches 300 pounds easy. But look at him trying to do pull-ups with his body weight. His size is actually working against him. Maria observed as Thompson, a muscular soldier from Bravo Company, fought through a set of pull-ups with obvious difficulty. His larger frame required significantly more strength to move through the full range of motion, and his form deteriorated rapidly as fatigue set in. Your strength-to-weight ratio is actually better than most soldiers in this unit, Rodriguez continued. The key is learning to use that advantage strategically, while building absolute strength in the areas where you need it most. Over the following weeks, Rodriguez redesigned Maria's training program with scientific precision. Morning sessions focused on explosive power development through Olympic lifting variations. Afternoon sessions emphasized endurance activities that would translate directly to Ranger training challenges. Evening sessions were dedicated to the mental preparation that Rodriguez considered even more crucial than physical conditioning. Rangers aren't just physically elite, he explained during one of their evening discussions in the base library. They're mentally bulletproof. The training is designed to break you psychologically first. Your body might be capable of completing the tasks, but if your mind gives up, none of that matters. Rodriguez pulled out a worn notebook filled with handwritten entries from his own Ranger training experience. The pages were filled with detailed accounts of sleepless nights, impossible physical challenges, and moments when quitting seemed like the only rational choice. "Read this," he said, pointing to an entry dated 3 weeks into his own Ranger training. Day 21. Slept maybe 4 hours in the last 3 days. Lost 15 pounds since we started. Today they had us low crawl through a swamp for 2 hours, while instructors fired blanks over our heads. Everything hurts. Can't remember why I thought this was a good idea. Maria read several more entries, each one documenting a level of physical and mental stress that seemed almost inhuman. But she also noticed something else in Rodriguez's writing, a gradual shift from desperation to determination, from questioning his choice to embracing the challenge. "The turning point came in week 4, Rodriguez explained. I realized that everyone was suffering equally. The biggest, strongest guys in my class were breaking down just like everyone else. That's when I understood that Ranger training isn't really about physical capability. It's about who's willing to continue when continuing seems impossible." The revelation changed how Maria approached her preparation. Instead of focusing solely on building strength and endurance, she began training her mind to function under extreme stress. Rodriguez introduced her to techniques used by Special Operations Forces worldwide, visualization exercises, stress inoculation training, and methods for maintaining focus during prolonged discomfort. "Close your eyes," Rodriguez instructed. During one evening session in the gym's auxiliary room, I want you to visualize yourself on day 15 of Ranger training. You haven't slept more than 2 hours in any single stretch for the past week. You've lost 10 pounds. Every muscle in your body aches. Your boots are giving you blisters, your pack feels like it weighs twice what it should, and you've got another 8-mile ruck march ahead of you. Maria followed his instructions, imagining herself in that state of exhaustion and discomfort. Her body tensed involuntarily as she pictured the scenario. "Now," Rodriguez continued, "instead of focusing on the pain or fatigue, I want you to find something positive in that moment. What keeps you moving forward when every rational thought tells you to quit?" The exercise proved more difficult than any physical training Maria had encountered. Finding motivation in imagined suffering required a mental discipline she'd never developed. But gradually, through repeated practice, she learned to access deeper sources of determination that existed beyond physical comfort. Meanwhile, her reputation within Alpha Company continued to evolve. The soldiers who had initially dismissed her capabilities were forced to acknowledge her consistent performance and relentless work ethic. Brooks, once her most vocal critic, found himself grudgingly impressed by her transformation. "Santos is different," she overheard him telling Chun during a break between training exercises. She's not just trying to prove a point anymore. She's actually getting dangerous. The comment, intended as professional respect rather than personal praise, marked a significant shift in how her peers perceived her. Maria had transitioned from being viewed as an outsider, trying to gain acceptance, to being recognized as a legitimate competitor for elite assignments. Colonel Patricia Hayes, the battalion commander, took notice of Maria's development during the company-wide evaluation exercise. The scenario involved a simulated reconnaissance mission requiring teams to gather intelligence while avoiding detection by opposing forces played by instructors from the Ranger Training Brigade. Maria's team, now led by her due to her demonstrated competence in similar exercises, successfully penetrated the simulated enemy position and gathered the required intelligence without being detected. Their performance was so impressive that Colonel Hayes personally observed their mission briefing. "Sergeant Santos," Hayes said after the exercise concluded, "I've been watching your development over the past several months. Your leadership during today's mission was exemplary. Have you given any thought to special operations?" The question caught Maria off guard. Colonel Hayes was known for her direct communication style, but personal career counseling from a battalion commander was unusual. "Yes, ma'am. I'm planning to submit a packet for Ranger training." Hayes studied Maria's face carefully. Ranger training is exceptionally demanding. The physical requirements alone eliminate most candidates before they reach the halfway point. "Are you confident you're prepared for that level of challenge?" "I believe so, ma'am. I've been working with Sergeant Rodriguez to prepare specifically for Ranger standards." "Rodriguez is an excellent choice for mentorship," Hayes acknowledged. "But mentorship only goes so far. Ultimately, you'll need to prove yourself against standards that don't account for size, gender, or any other factor except performance." Hayes paused, clearly weighing her next words carefully. "I'm going to be direct with you, Sergeant. There are people in this organization who believe women don't belong in Ranger training. There are others who believe your size disqualifies you regardless of gender. If you attempt this and fail, those people will use your failure to justify excluding other women from similar opportunities." The weight of Hayes' words settled over Maria like a physical burden. She had been focused on her personal goals, but now she understood that her attempt would carry implications far beyond her individual success or failure. "I understand the stakes, ma'am." "Do you?" Hayes challenged. "Because if you're not absolutely certain you can succeed, it might be better to wait. Build more experience, gain more strength. Ensure you're as prepared as humanly possible before attempting something this visible." That night, Maria called her parents for the first time in 3 months. Her father, a retired Marine who had encouraged her military service from the beginning, listened quietly as she explained her Ranger ambitions and the pressure she was feeling. "Mia," he said finally, using the Spanish nickname he'd called her. "Since childhood, your mother and I didn't raise you to take the safe path. We raised you to do what's right, even when it's difficult." Her mother, a high school principal who had fought her own battles against institutional skepticism, offered different advice. "Maria, you need to be honest with yourself about your motivations. Are you doing this because you genuinely believe you belong in special operations? Or because you're trying to prove something to people who will never accept you, regardless of what you achieve?" The question forced Maria to examine her deepest motivations. Was she pursuing Ranger training because she truly wanted to serve in that capacity, or because she was driven by a need to prove her doubters wrong? After hours of reflection, she realized the answer was both. She genuinely believed she could contribute meaningfully to special operations missions, but she also recognized that her success would open doors for other women who shared similar aspirations. The dual motivation, rather than undermining her commitment, actually strengthened her resolve. Rodriguez noticed the change in her demeanor during their next training session. "Something's different about you today," He observed as Maria attacked a particularly challenging obstacle course sequence with renewed intensity. "I talked to Colonel Hayes yesterday. She made me realize that this isn't just about me anymore." Rodriguez nodded knowingly. That's the moment when boys become men and soldiers become warriors. When you understand that your actions affect more than just yourself, you find strength you didn't know existed. He had Maria repeat the obstacle course sequence 3 more times, each repetition faster and more precise than the last. Her movements became more fluid, her decision-making more instinctive. She was transforming from someone who could complete the challenges to someone who dominated them. The following week brought news that would test Maria's resolve in ways she hadn't anticipated. The Army announced a new policy requiring all soldiers applying for Ranger training to complete a pre-assessment course designed to eliminate unqualified candidates before they reached the main program. The course, known as Ranger Assessment and Selection Program Phase 0, or RASP-0, would be conducted at Fort Benning and would include many of the physical and mental challenges that cause most failures in the full program. "This is actually good news for you," Rodriguez explained when Maria expressed concern about the additional hurdle. RASP-0 will eliminate soldiers who are physically unprepared or mentally uncommitted. If you can pass it, you'll enter the main program with a higher probability of success. But Maria understood the underlying implications. The new requirement would give her critics another opportunity to argue that she wasn't qualified. If she failed RASP-0, it would be seen as validation of their skepticism. If she passed, they would simply claim that the standards had been lowered to accommodate her. She threw herself into preparation with even greater intensity. Morning sessions extended from 1 hour to 90 minutes. Afternoon training incorporated longer distances and heavier loads. Evening mental preparation sessions focused on scenarios specifically designed to replicate the stress and confusion of Ranger training. Rodriguez introduced increasingly sophisticated challenges that combined physical demands with complex problem-solving requirements. Maria found herself navigating obstacle courses while performing mathematical calculations, completing endurance events while maintaining radio communications, and leading team exercises while functioning on minimal sleep. Rangers don't get to focus on just one thing at a time, Rodriguez explained during a particularly grueling session that required Maria to carry a 60-pound pack while solving navigation problems under time pressure. Combat is chaos. You need to be able to think clearly and perform physically while everything around you is falling apart. The training was unlike anything Maria had experienced, but she found herself adapting and improving with each challenge. Her body was becoming stronger and more resilient, but more importantly, her mind was developing the flexibility and toughness required for special operations. Word of Maria's Ranger aspirations spread throughout Fort Campbell, attracting attention from soldiers throughout the installation. Some came to observe her training sessions out of curiosity. Others came to offer encouragement or advice. A few came hoping to witness her failure. Captain James Morrison from the Ranger Training Brigade happened to be visiting Fort Campbell and observed one of Maria's training sessions. Morrison, a veteran Ranger instructor with a reputation for brutal honesty, watched silently as Maria completed a series of challenges that would have broken many soldiers. After the session concluded, Morrison approached Rodriguez privately. "Is she serious about this?" "Dead serious," Rodriguez replied. "And she's got the potential to succeed if she stays healthy and maintains her current trajectory." Morrison studied Maria as she cleaned her equipment and prepared for the evening briefing session. "She's smaller than anyone who's ever passed the program. She's also more determined than most who've attempted it," Rodriguez countered. "Size matters, but it's not the only factor that determines success." The conversation between the two Rangers didn't go unnoticed by Maria, who sensed that some form of evaluation had just taken place. She approached Rodriguez after Morrison departed. "What did he want?" "To see if you're the real deal," or just another soldier with unrealistic aspirations?" Rodriguez replied honestly. "I think you impressed him, but impressing someone during a single training session is very different from succeeding during 61 days of continuous evaluation." As summer turned toward autumn, Maria's preparation entered its final phase. Her physical capabilities had improved dramatically. She could now complete the 12-mile Ruck march standard in under 2 hours and 45 minutes, carry her own body weight plus equipment for extended distances, and function effectively on minimal sleep for days at a time. More importantly, her mental preparation had reached a level that even Rodriguez found impressive. She could maintain focus and decision-making capability under extreme stress, adapt quickly to changing situations, and lead effectively even when she was personally suffering. But the ultimate test still lay ahead. In 6 weeks, she would report to Fort Benning for RASP-0, where she would finally discover whether months of preparation had been sufficient to overcome the doubts and limitations that others had placed on her capabilities. The whispers at Fort Campbell had evolved from skeptical dismissal to cautious optimism. But Maria knew that opinions at her current assignment mattered little compared to the objective standards she would face in Georgia. There, her size, gender, and background would be irrelevant. Only her performance would determine whether she continued toward her goal or joined the majority of candidates who returned home with their dreams unfulfilled. The Georgia heat hit Maria like a physical wall as she stepped off the bus at Fort Benning. Even at 0600 hours, the temperature was already climbing toward what promised to be a scorching September day. Around her, 37 other soldiers gathered their gear with the nervous energy of athletes before a championship game. These were the volunteers for RASP-0, each one convinced they had what it took to earn a slot in the full Ranger program. Maria scanned her fellow candidates with professional interest. They were, without exception, larger than her. Most stood at least 6 inches taller and outweighed her by 50 pounds or more. Several looked like they could have played college football. A few carried themselves with the quiet confidence that suggested prior special operations experience. "Listen up, future failures," barked a voice that could have shattered concrete. Staff Sergeant Kevin Blake emerged from the administrative building, his ranger tab gleaming in the early morning sun. Behind him followed 3 other instructors, each wearing the distinctive black and gold tab that marked them as graduates of the Army's most demanding leadership course. "You are here because you think you have what it takes to become Army Rangers," Blake continued, his voice carrying easily across the formation. "Statistically speaking, 32 of you are wrong. The historical pass rate for RASP-0 is approximately 15%. For the full Ranger program, it drops to about 45% of those who make it through pre-assessment." Blake's eyes moved systematically across the formation, pausing briefly on each candidate. When his gaze reached Maria, she felt the weight of immediate judgment. His expression didn't change, but she sensed a flicker of skepticism that confirmed her fears about how she would be perceived. "Some of you are probably wondering about the size and composition of this group," Blake said, his comment clearly directed at Maria's presence among the overwhelmingly male candidates. "Let me be absolutely clear. There are no different standards. Here, no accommodations, no allowances, no participation trophies. You meet the standard, or you go home. Period." The message was unmistakable, and Maria felt 37 sets of eyes briefly turn toward her. She maintained her position of attention, but internally she noted the faces of candidates who seemed particularly interested in Blake's comments about standards. "Your first evolution begins in 30 minutes, Blake announced. Gear inspection, followed by the Army Combat Fitness Test. Anyone who fails to meet Ranger standards on any component will be immediately removed from the course. Questions?" The formation remained silent. Questions at this point would be interpreted as weakness or uncertainty, neither of which would create a positive first impression. Outstanding. Sergeant Martinez will show you to your billeting area. Stow your gear, change into PT uniform, and form up in the courtyard in 28 minutes. Do not be late. The barracks were Spartan even by Army standards, concrete. Floors, metal bunk beds, and lockers that had seen decades of use by hopeful Rangers. Maria found herself assigned to a bay with 7 other candidates, including a massive soldier named Thompson from the 82nd Airborne and a wiry sergeant named Kumar who wore Special Forces combat patches on his uniform. "So you're the one everyone's talking about," Thompson said as Maria arranged her gear in the assigned locker. His tone was neutral, but Maria detected an undercurrent of curiosity rather than hostility. "I'm not sure what you mean," Maria replied, continuing to organize her equipment with methodical precision. Kumar looked up from his own preparations. "Word travels fast in the Special Operations community. Female soldier from the 101st trying to break barriers, all that. No pressure or anything." The comment was delivered with a slight smile that suggested Kumar meant no offense, but Maria understood the implication. Her attempt was being watched by people throughout the military community, and the expectations, both positive and negative, would follow her through every phase of training. "I'm just here to earn my tab like everyone else," Maria said. Simply. "Fair enough," Thompson replied. "Just know that some of the guys aren't exactly thrilled about the idea of women in Ranger training. Politics and all that. Try to stay clear of Davis and Williams. They've been pretty vocal about their opinions." Maria glanced across the bay to where 2 soldiers were engaged in animated conversation. Both were large, muscular men who carried themselves with the aggressive confidence that sometimes masked insecurity. She made mental notes of their faces and decided to maintain professional distance. The ACFT began with the 3-repetition maximum deadlift. Rangers were required to lift at least 180 pounds 3 times, a standard that eliminated many otherwise qualified soldiers. Maria approached the barbell loaded with the minimum weight, knowing that she would need to perform flawlessly to avoid giving her critics ammunition. The first repetition felt solid, her form technically perfect despite the challenging weight. The second rep required more effort, but she completed it cleanly. On the third attempt, she felt her grip beginning to slip just as she reached full extension. For a terrifying moment, she thought the bar might fall from her hands, but her months of preparation paid off. The lift was successful, meeting the minimum standard with no room for error. Around her, other candidates were attempting weights ranging from 200 to 280 pounds. Their superior size allowed them to exceed the minimum standard by significant margins, but Maria knew that meeting the standard was sufficient. Rangers weren't judged on how much extra they could lift beyond requirements. The standing power throw went similarly, with Maria's 8-meter distance meeting the required standard while falling short of the impressive distances achieved by larger candidates. Hand-release push-ups played to her strengths, as her lighter frame and excellent upper body conditioning allowed her to complete significantly more repetitions than required. That the sprint drag carry event tested functional strength across multiple movement patterns. Maria attacked each station with focused intensity, her movements efficient and economical. She finished in the middle of the group, a performance that suggested competence without drawing particular attention. Leg tucks showcased her core strength and grip endurance, areas where her rock climbing background provided significant advantages. She completed more repetitions than several larger soldiers, earning grudging nods from instructors who were carefully monitoring every candidate's performance. The 2-mile run concluded the fitness assessment, and here Maria found herself in familiar territory. Her cardiovascular conditioning was exceptional, developed through years of high-altitude training and refined through months of specific preparation. She finished 3rd overall, behind only 2 candidates who appeared to be dedicated distance runners. Blake reviewed the results with characteristic efficiency. 35 candidates remain. Johnson and Martinez failed to meet deadlift standards and have been removed from the course. The rest of you have earned the privilege of continuing to the next phase. Maria felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. She had survived the first cut, but she knew that the physical fitness test was likely the easiest challenge she would face. The real evaluation was just beginning. The afternoon brought land navigation training, a skill that would be tested extensively. Throughout ranger training, candidates were issued map and compass sets and given instruction on advanced navigation, techniques that went far beyond basic orienteering. Rangers operate in environments where GPS systems may be unreliable or compromised, explained Sergeant First Class Rodriguez, one of the assistant instructors. You need to be able to navigate accurately using only map and compass, regardless of weather conditions, visibility, or stress levels. The training area was a densely forested section of Fort Benning that had been used for military instruction for decades. Trails crisscrossed the terrain, but they were designed to confuse rather than assist navigation. Candidates would need to rely entirely on their technical skills to locate assigned objectives. Maria's first navigation course consisted of 4 points, spread across a 6-kilometer route through challenging terrain. She had 4 hours to locate all points and return to the starting location, a time limit that would require both speed and accuracy. The first point was relatively straightforward, located on a hilltop that provided good visibility for confirming her position. Maria found it within 30 minutes, her pace steady and her navigation calculations proving accurate. The second point proved more challenging, hidden in a valley where terrain features were less distinct and compass readings required careful interpretation. Thought by the time she located the third point, Maria had consumed nearly half her allotted time. The fourth point would require precise navigation through dense forest, where maintaining accurate bearing would be extremely difficult. She studied her map carefully, identifying terrain features that would allow her to confirm her position as she moved toward the final objective. The route to the fourth point led through a creek bottom where vegetation was thick and visibility was limited to only a few meters in any direction. Maria relied on dead reckoning, counting paces and maintaining bearing despite the challenging conditions. When she finally located the objective, she had 15 minutes remaining to return to the start point. The return journey required her to move faster than was comfortable while maintaining awareness of her position. She emerged from the forest with 3 minutes to spare, one of only 12 candidates to successfully complete the course within the time limit. Acceptable performance, Blake commented as Maria reported her completion. The lukewarm praise was typical of ranger instructors, who rarely offered encouragement that might reduce a candidate's motivation to improve. Evening brought the first of what would be many sleepless nights. Candidates were assigned to guard shifts that would test their ability to maintain alertness and perform duties while functioning on minimal rest. Maria drew the 020-020-400 shift, a time when the human body naturally experiences its lowest energy levels. The guard position overlooked a simulated enemy approach route, and candidates were required to maintain vigilance while monitoring radio communications and updating situation reports every 30 minutes. The task seemed simple, but Maria understood that everything in ranger training was designed to evaluate multiple capabilities simultaneously. During her shift, she noticed movement in the tree line that didn't match natural patterns. After careful observation, she identified 2 instructors attempting to test her alertness by conducting a simulated infiltration of the perimeter. She reported the activity through proper channels, earning a brief nod of approval from the sergeant, who came to investigate. The next morning brought weapons training that would establish safety protocols and baseline marksmanship standards. Rangers were expected to be expert marksmen with multiple weapon systems, capable of engaging targets accurately under stress and adverse conditions. Maria's Air Force background served her well during the marksmanship, Evaluation. Her scores were among the highest in the group, a performance that surprised some candidates who had assumed her smaller size would negatively affect her shooting ability. Davis, one of the soldiers Thompson had warned her about, made a comment about lucky shots that was clearly intended to diminish her achievement. "Luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity," Maria replied calmly, repeating a phrase Rodriguez had taught her during their training sessions. "I've been preparing for this for a long time." Davis's expression darkened, but he said nothing further. Maria sensed that her response had effectively ended that particular challenge, but she also understood that Davis would be looking for other opportunities to undermine her performance. The afternoon brought small unit tactics training, where candidates worked in teams to accomplish objectives that required coordination, communication, and leadership. Maria found herself assigned to a squad with Davis, Williams, and 4 other soldiers who ranged from neutral to supportive in their attitudes toward her presence. The mission involved approaching a simulated enemy position, gathering intelligence, and withdrawing without being detected. Success would require careful planning, precise execution, and the ability to adapt when conditions changed unexpectedly. Davis immediately assumed leadership of the squad, his aggressive personality dominating the planning session. His approach was direct and simple. Approach the objective quickly, gather the required information, and withdraw along the same route. When Maria suggested alternative approaches that might reduce their detection risk, Davis dismissed her input. "We're not here to overthink things," he said curtly. "Speed and aggression work. Complicated plans just create more opportunities for failure." The mission proceeded according to Davis's plan initially, but 50 meters from the objective, the squad encountered an unexpected obstacle, a patrol of instructors acting as opposing forces. Davis's direct approach had led them into an ambush that compromised the entire mission. As the squad regrouped after the failed exercise, Blake approached for the after-action review. His questions were pointed and designed to identify both tactical errors and leadership failures. "Davis, explain your planning process." Davis launched into a defensive explanation of his tactical decisions, emphasizing the speed and simplicity of his approach while avoiding responsibility for the mission failure. "Santos," Blake continued, "you suggested alternative approaches. During planning, explain your recommendations." Maria outlined her suggested modifications to the approach route and withdrawal plan, emphasizing how they might have avoided the instructor patrol that had compromised their mission. Her analysis was clear and technically sound, demonstrating a sophisticated understanding of small unit tactics. Blake nodded approvingly. "Santos's recommendations would have significantly improved your chances of success. Davis, leadership isn't about having the loudest voice or the most aggressive plan. It's about making decisions that accomplish the mission while protecting your soldiers." The public criticism of Davis's leadership and validation of Maria's tactical thinking created a shift in squad dynamics. The other soldiers began seeking her input during subsequent planning sessions, and Davis's attempts to dominate discussions became less effective. As the first week of RASP 0 concluded, Maria had established herself as a technically competent and mentally tough candidate. She had met every physical standard, demonstrated superior skills in several areas, and shown the kind of tactical thinking that Rangers valued. But she also understood that the real challenges lay ahead, as the program would become progressively more demanding and the margin for error would continue to shrink. 15 candidates had been eliminated during the first week, leaving 20 remaining to continue into the second phase. Maria had survived the initial cuts, but she knew that the instructors were just beginning to apply the pressure that would separate true Rangers from those who simply thought they wanted to be Rangers. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The heat, the sleep deprivation, and the constant evaluation were already taking their toll on candidates who had arrived. Confident in their abilities, Maria felt the strain as well, but her months of preparation were proving their value. She was adapting to the stress rather than being overwhelmed by it, a distinction that would become increasingly important as RASP 0 entered its most challenging phases. The second week of RASP 0 began with what Blake euphemistically called movement under load training, but what every candidate understood to be the beginning of the Ruck March evolution that would break more soldiers than any other single challenge. At 0430 hours, Maria stood in formation with 19 other remaining candidates, each wearing a fully loaded rucksack that had been weighed and inspected to ensure compliance with the 35-pound minimum standard. Today you will demonstrate your ability to move efficiently while carrying combat loads over varied terrain, Blake announced, his voice cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. The route is 8 miles through some of Fort Benning's most challenging training areas. You have 2 hours to complete the movement. Anyone who falls behind the pace vehicle or requires medical attention will be immediately removed from the course. Maria adjusted the shoulder straps of her rucksack, feeling the familiar weight distribution that she had practiced countless times during her preparation at Fort Campbell. The pack contained not just the required weight, but also the additional gear that Rangers carried in combat situations: extra ammunition, communications equipment, first aid supplies, and the personal items that sustained soldiers during extended operations. The formation moved out in single file, following a dirt trail that wound through dense Georgia pine forest. The pace was deceptively moderate for the first mile, allowing candidates to settle into their individual rhythms and adjust their equipment as needed. Maria positioned herself in the middle of the formation, close enough to the leaders to avoid being caught behind slower soldiers, but not so far forward as to burn energy unnecessarily. Kumar, the Special Forces soldier who had bunked near her, maintained a position just ahead of Maria. His movement was economical and smooth, the result of years of carrying heavy loads across difficult terrain. Behind her, she could hear the labored breathing of Williams, one of Davis's allies who had consistently questioned her physical capabilities. "How you feeling back there, Santos?" Williams called out, his voice carrying a mocking tone despite his obvious exertion. "This is just the warm-up. Wait until we hit the real training." Maria didn't respond, focusing instead on maintaining her breathing rhythm and monitoring her body's responses to the load and pace. Rodriguez had taught her that ruck marches were as much mental as physical challenges, and engaging with negative voices was a waste of energy she would need later. The second mile brought the first significant terrain challenge as the trail climbed steadily through rolling hills that forced candidates to work against both gravity and increasing fatigue. Maria's legs began to feel the burn of sustained effort, but her cardiovascular conditioning kept her breathing controlled and her pace steady. Several candidates ahead of her began to spread out as individual fitness levels became apparent. Thompson, despite his size, was moving smoothly and appeared to be suffering little from the combination of weight and terrain. 2 soldiers Maria didn't know well were already beginning to struggle, their movements becoming less efficient as fatigue accumulated. The third mile marked the point where RASP 0 separated serious candidates from those who had overestimated their preparation. The trail descended into a creek bottom where recent rains had created muddy conditions that grabbed at boots and made each step more energy-intensive than normal walking. Maria watched as one candidate, a sergeant from the 25th Infantry Division, stumbled and went down hard in the mud. He struggled to his feet, his uniform now caked with Georgia clay, but his movements had lost their earlier confidence. She could see in his posture that he was already beginning to question whether he could complete the march. "Keep moving," Blake's voice carried from the pace vehicle that followed the formation. "No one stops to help. This is an individual test of your personal capabilities." The instruction was harsh but necessary. Rangers operated in environments where individual competence could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Soldiers who couldn't maintain themselves under basic training conditions would become liabilities during actual combat operations. The 4th mile brought the steepest climb of the route, a half-mile ascent that tested every candidate's ability to maintain pace while fighting both gravity and accumulated fatigue. Maria's legs began to feel heavy, and she could taste the metallic flavor that indicated her body was working at the edge of its aerobic capacity. Behind her, Williams was no longer making sarcastic comments. His breathing had become labored, and she could hear the irregular rhythm that suggested he was struggling to maintain the required pace. Other candidates were spreading out even further as individual limitations became apparent. Maria focused on her technique, keeping her steps short and efficient while maintaining the forward lean that Rodriguez had taught her for climbing under load. Her pack felt heavier than it had at the start, but she knew that was normal as fatigue accumulated and her body began to protest the sustained effort. At the top of the climb, Blake called for a brief halt to allow candidates to hydrate and check their equipment. Maria used the opportunity to assess her condition and observe her fellow candidates. Several were clearly suffering, their faces flushed with exertion and their movements less controlled than they had been earlier. "Halfway point," Blake announced. 4 miles down, 4 to go. The second half of this route includes obstacles that will test your ability to function effectively while carrying load. Anyone who feels they cannot continue should speak up now. None of the candidates responded, but Maria could see doubt in several faces. The combination of distance, weight, and challenging terrain was beginning to expose the differences between soldiers who were truly prepared and those who had hoped their general fitness would be sufficient. The 5th mile introduced the first constructed obstacles, a series of walls, ditches, and barriers that required candidates to climb, crawl, and jump while wearing their full packs. Maria's smaller size became an advantage as she navigated tight spaces and vertical obstacles that challenged larger soldiers. She watched Davis struggle with a wall climb that required him to pull his entire body weight, plus pack over a 6-foot barrier. His superior upper body strength eventually got him over the obstacle, but the effort was costly in terms of energy expenditure and recovery time. Kumar moved through the obstacles with practiced efficiency, his special forces background evident in the way he approached each challenge. "Nice technique," he commented to Maria as they both cleared a low crawl obstacle that required them to stay below wire barriers while carrying their packs. The comment was the first positive feedback Maria had received from another candidate, and it provided a small psychological boost as they entered the final phase of the march. She was not just surviving the challenges, she was performing well relative to soldiers with more experience and superior size advantages. The 6th mile featured a water crossing that soaked every candidate and added the challenge of wet boots and soggy clothing to their existing fatigue. The creek was waist-deep and had a muddy bottom that made each step uncertain. Maria's lighter weight was an advantage in the soft footing, allowing her to move more quickly than larger soldiers who sank deeper into the creek bed. As they emerged from the water crossing, she noticed that Williams was beginning to fall behind significantly. His earlier bravado had been replaced by the grim determination of someone fighting to avoid failure. 2 other candidates were also showing signs of serious distress, their movements becoming mechanical and inefficient. The 7th mile brought the steepest descent of the route, a technical challenge that tested balance and control while carrying unstable loads. Several candidates struggled with the combination of gravity, momentum, and pack weight that made controlled movement difficult on the steep terrain. Maria's experience hiking in Colorado's mountains served her well as she navigated the descent with confidence and efficiency. She had learned to trust her footing and use controlled slides rather than fighting gravity, techniques that conserved energy while maintaining safety. 1 mile to go, Blake announced as the formation regrouped at the bottom of the descent. "This final mile will determine who has the mental toughness to push through when their body wants to quit. Rangers don't have the luxury of stopping when things get uncomfortable." The final mile was designed to break candidates who had managed to survive everything up to that point. The trail climbed again, but this time through sand and loose soil. That made every step require maximum effort. It was the kind of terrain that punished soldiers who relied purely on physical strength, while rewarding those who could maintain technique and mental focus under extreme fatigue. Maria's vision began to tunnel as her body reached the limits of its energy reserves. Her legs felt like concrete pillars, and her pack seemed to have doubled in weight since the beginning of the march. But Rodriguez's mental training proved its value as she found the psychological resources to continue moving forward when every physical signal told her to stop. Behind her, she could hear one candidate's breathing becoming irregular and desperate. A quick glance back revealed Williams stumbling and weaving as he fought to maintain forward progress. His face was pale despite his exertion, and she recognized the signs of someone approaching complete physical breakdown. "Help!" Williams gasped, his voice barely audible. "Can single quotes can't make it." The plea created an immediate moral dilemma for Maria. Blake had explicitly stated that this was an individual test and that helping others was prohibited. But Williams, despite his earlier hostility, was a fellow soldier who was clearly in distress. Maria slowed her pace slightly, moving closer to Williams without making it obvious that she was providing assistance. "Match my breathing," she said. "Quietly, in through your nose, out through your mouth. Focus on the rhythm, not the distance." She couldn't physically help him carry his load, but she could provide the kind of psychological support that sometimes made the difference between success and failure. Williams gradually synchronized his breathing with hers, and his movement became more controlled as he focused on her technique rather than his own suffering. The final quarter mile seemed to stretch forever, each step requiring conscious decision-making. As accumulated fatigue fought against determination, Maria could see the finish line ahead, marked by instructors with clipboards who were recording each candidate's arrival time. Kumar crossed first, his steady pace and superior conditioning allowing him to finish strong despite the challenging conditions. Thompson followed close behind, his size having proven less of a disadvantage than some candidates had expected. Maria maintained her position in the middle of the pack, crossing the finish line with enough energy left to suggest that she had managed her effort effectively throughout the march. Williams stumbled across the line 30 seconds behind her, his completion a testament to his determination, if not his physical preparation. Of the 20 candidates who had started the march, 17 finished within the required time limit. 3 soldiers, including the sergeant who had fallen in the mud during the 3rd mile, had been picked up by the pace vehicle after falling too far behind the required standard. Blake reviewed the results with characteristic efficiency. 17 candidates remain. The soldiers who failed to complete today's movement have been removed from the course and will return to their parent units. Those who remain have demonstrated the basic physical capability required for ranger training, but you should understand that today's march was significantly easier than what you will face in the full program. Maria felt a mixture of exhaustion and satisfaction as she processed Blake's words. She had not just survived one of the most challenging phases of RASP 0, she had performed well relative to candidates who outweighed her by 50 or 60 pounds. Her months of preparation had proven their worth, but she also understood that each success only raised the stakes for future challenges. The afternoon brought no rest as candidates were immediately assigned to additional training that would test their ability to function effectively despite their accumulated fatigue. The lesson was clear: Rangers didn't get recovery time between challenges, and neither would RASP 0 candidates. During the evening meal, Maria noticed a subtle shift in how other candidates interacted with her. Davis, who had been openly skeptical of her capabilities, now maintained respectful distance rather than challenging her directly. Several soldiers who had been neutral were now openly friendly, recognizing that she had earned her place through performance rather than politics. "That was a solid march," Thompson commented as they cleaned their equipment in the barracks that evening. "I wasn't sure how you'd handle the load, but you made it look easy." The comment was generous, considering that Maria had been anything but comfortable during the final miles of the movement. But she understood that appearing to struggle would have undermined her credibility with candidates who were still evaluating whether she belonged in their ranks. Kumar was more direct in his assessment. "You've got the Ruck march figured out," he said quietly. "But the next phase is going to test different capabilities. Mental toughness, leadership under pressure, decision-making when you're exhausted. Physical fitness will only take you so far." His words proved prophetic as Blake outlined the following week's training schedule. Candidates would face sleep deprivation, complex problem-solving scenarios, and leadership challenges designed to identify soldiers who could function effectively when normal decision-making processes were compromised by stress and fatigue. Maria understood that surviving the Ruck March had been necessary but not sufficient. She had proven her basic physical capabilities, but the real evaluation of her potential as a ranger was just beginning. The challenges ahead would test aspects of her character and competence that couldn't be developed through simple physical training. As she lay in her bunk that night, every muscle in her body aching from the day's exertions, Maria reflected on how far she had already come. 6 months earlier, soldiers at Fort Campbell had questioned whether she belonged in a combat unit. Now she was among the final 17 candidates competing for slots in the Army's most elite training program. But she also understood that the margin for error was shrinking with each challenge. Every candidate who remained had demonstrated exceptional capabilities, and the competition for final selection would be increasingly intense. Tomorrow would bring new tests that would further separate those who could perform under pressure from those who simply possessed impressive resumes. The thought should have been intimidating, but Maria found herself looking forward to the continued challenges. She had spent her entire military career proving herself to skeptics, and RASP 0 was simply the most demanding version of a process she knew well. The difference was that here, unlike in previous assignments, her performance was being evaluated by instructors who cared only about capability and results. Sleep deprivation hit the remaining candidates like a sledgehammer wrapped in velvet, gradual at first, then devastatingly comprehensive. By the 3rd day of the psychological warfare phase, Maria had accumulated perhaps 6 hours of total rest across 72 hours of continuous training. Her eyes burned with fatigue, her reaction times had slowed noticeably, and simple tasks that should have been automatic now required conscious thought and deliberate effort. The instructors had designed this phase with scientific precision, understanding that rangers would often operate in environments where adequate rest was impossible for extended periods. Combat didn't pause for human circadian rhythms, and neither would ranger training. The remaining 17 candidates found themselves thrust into a world where exhaustion became a constant companion and mental clarity a precious, fleeting resource. "Your mission," Blake announced during what would have been a normal breakfast hour, "is to plan and execute a raid on an enemy compound located 8 kilometers from your current position. You have 45 minutes to conduct reconnaissance. Develop your plan, brief your teammates, and begin movement to the objective." Maria's mind, normally sharp and analytical, felt like it was operating through thick fog. The simple act of reading the map required intense concentration, and she found herself double-checking calculations that should have been elementary. Around her, other candidates were experiencing similar cognitive degradation, their movements slower and their decision-making processes visibly impaired. Kumar, despite his special forces background and obvious experience with sleep deprivation, was rubbing his eyes frequently and speaking more slowly than usual. Thompson, whose physical strength had carried him through previous challenges, seemed disoriented by the mental demands of planning complex operations while functioning on minimal rest. "Santos, your team leader for this evolution," Blake continued, his announcement hitting Maria like a physical blow. Leadership under normal circumstances was challenging enough, but taking charge of exhausted, stressed soldiers while her own cognitive capabilities were compromised represented an entirely different level of difficulty. She looked around at her assigned team: Kumar, Thompson, Davis, and two other candidates named Rodriguez and Jackson. Davis's expression was particularly difficult to read, a mixture of resignation and barely concealed resentment at being placed under the command of the soldier he had consistently underestimated. "All right," Maria began, her voice harsher than usual from fatigue and stress. "We need to move fast and think clearly, despite how we're all feeling. Kumar, your experience with this type of operation makes you my primary advisor. Thompson, you'll handle the heavy weapons. Davis and Rodriguez, your assault element leaders. Jackson, your communications." The role assignments were logical and played to each soldier's demonstrated strengths, but Maria could see the exhaustion in every face. Even Kumar's usual confidence seemed diminished by the accumulated stress of the past 3 days. They spread the map across a wooden table that had seen decades of similar planning sessions. The objective was a cluster of buildings, surrounded by open ground that would make approach difficult and withdrawal potentially catastrophic if not properly planned. Multiple entry and exit routes needed to be identified, along with contingency plans for various scenarios that might develop during the operation. "Standard approach would be from the north," Kumar offered, his finger tracing potential routes on the map. "Cover and concealment are better, and the terrain gives us multiple withdrawal options if things go wrong." Maria studied the topographical features, her tired mind working through the tactical implications of Kumar's suggestion. The northern approach was indeed more defensible, but it was also the most obvious choice, exactly what enemy forces would expect and prepare for. "I'm thinking south," she said finally. "It's more exposed, but that's exactly why they won't expect it. If we can move fast and maintain surprise, we can be in and out before they can mount an effective response." Davis looked up from his own study of the map, skepticism evident in his expression. "That's a huge risk. If we get caught in the open on that southern approach, we're completely exposed. No cover, no concealment, nowhere to run if things go bad." The disagreement created immediate tension within the team. Davis's tactical assessment was sound. The southern approach was inherently more dangerous. But Maria's reasoning was equally valid. Sometimes, the most dangerous route was also the most effective because it was unexpected. "Leadership is about making decisions when there are no perfect options," Maria replied, her words echoing training she had received from Rodriguez months earlier. "The southern approach gives us the best chance of achieving surprise, which is our most important tactical advantage." Kumar nodded slowly, his experience allowing him to see the merit in Maria's unconventional thinking. Surprise beats firepower most of the time. If we can get inside their decision-making cycle, we control the engagement. The planning session continued with increasing urgency as their 45-minute deadline approached. Maria found herself fighting not just the tactical challenges of the mission, but also the physical effects of exhaustion that made concentration increasingly difficult. Her hands shook slightly as she marked positions on the map, and she had to force herself to speak clearly despite the fatigue that slurred her words. "Time," Blake announced exactly 45 minutes after the evolution had begun. "Brief your plan to the evaluators, then begin movement to your objective." Maria's briefing was concise but comprehensive, covering the approach route, assault plan, contingency procedures, and withdrawal timeline. Her delivery was steady despite her exhaustion, and she could see grudging approval in the expressions of the instructor panel. Even Davis seemed impressed by the thoroughness of her preparation and the clarity of her communication. The movement to the objective began immediately, with Maria's team loaded into vehicles that would transport them to within 2 kilometers of their target. The final approach would be conducted on foot, through terrain that offered minimal cover and required careful movement to avoid detection by the opposing force instructors. During the vehicle movement, Maria used the time to conduct final coordination with her team members. Despite their fatigue, each soldier seemed focused and committed to the mission's success. Even Davis appeared to have set aside his personal reservations in favor of professional execution. "Remember," Maria told the team as they prepared to dismount, "speed and surprise are our primary advantages. Once we initiate the assault, everything happens fast. Stick to the plan, but be ready to adapt if the situation changes." The final approach required Maria's team to cross nearly 1 kilometer of open ground during daylight hours, while avoiding detection by instructor observers positioned throughout the training area. The southern route she had selected proved even more challenging than the map had suggested. With minimal terrain features to provide concealment, Maria led from the front, using every technique Rodriguez had taught her about moving tactically across exposed terrain. The team advanced in bounds, with individual soldiers covering each other's movement while maintaining spacing that would minimize casualties if they were discovered. Halfway to the objective, Thompson stumbled and went down hard, his exhaustion finally overwhelming his coordination. The sound of his fall seemed impossibly loud in the quiet morning air, and Maria immediately signaled for the team to freeze in place while they assessed whether their position had been compromised. After 30 seconds of tense observation, it became clear that Thompson's fall had not been detected by the opposing forces. But Thompson himself was obviously struggling, his movements unsteady and his breathing labored. The accumulated stress of 3 days without adequate rest was taking its toll on even the strongest candidates. "Can you continue?" Maria whispered, knowing that Thompson's condition could compromise the entire mission if he was unable to perform his assigned role. "I'm good," Thompson replied, but his voice lacked conviction. Maria could see that he was fighting to maintain focus and physical coordination despite his obvious exhaustion. She made a quick tactical decision, reassigning Thompson to a less demanding role while shifting other team members to compensate for his diminished capability. The changes required rapid communication and coordination, but her team adapted quickly to the new assignments. The final approach to the objective was conducted under increasingly difficult conditions as the opposing force instructors had positioned themselves to create maximum psychological pressure on the attacking team. Blank ammunition fired overhead created realistic stress, while smoke and noise simulators added confusion and disorientation to an already challenging tactical problem. Maria's team reached their assault positions exactly on schedule, despite the numerous complications that had developed during the approach. The southern route, while dangerous, had indeed provided the surprise advantage she had anticipated. The opposing forces were clearly positioned to defend against a northern approach, and were caught off guard by the unconventional attack direction. "Execute," Maria commanded over the radio, and her team launched their assault with precision and coordination that impressed even the instructor evaluators. Despite their exhaustion and the challenges they had faced during the approach, each soldier performed his assigned role with professional competence. The simulated assault was completed in under 3 minutes, with Maria's team successfully securing the objective and preparing for withdrawal before the opposing forces could mount an effective counterattack. The speed and efficiency of their execution vindicated her tactical planning and demonstrated the effectiveness of her leadership under pressure. "Excellent work," Blake commented during the after-action review, his praise unusually direct and unqualified. "Santos, your planning was sound and your execution was flawless. More importantly, you adapted effectively when conditions changed." and maintained team cohesion despite individual challenges. The success felt hollow to Maria, not because she wasn't proud of her team's performance, but because the exhaustion had reached levels that made even positive feedback difficult to process emotionally. She understood intellectually that they had performed well, but her body and mind were operating in survival mode that left little capacity for satisfaction or celebration. The afternoon brought no respite as the candidates were immediately assigned to another leadership rotation that would test different aspects of their capabilities. This time, Kumar assumed a leadership role for a defensive operation that required the team to hold terrain against a simulated enemy attack. Maria found herself in a supporting role, responsible for communications and coordination between different elements of their defensive position. The change from leader to follower required a different type of mental discipline, particularly when she disagreed with some of Kumar's tactical decisions. But she understood that successful Rangers needed to be effective both as leaders and as subordinates, capable of supporting their assigned role regardless of their personal opinions. She executed her assigned duties with the same precision she had demonstrated as a leader, earning Kumar's appreciation and the continued respect of her teammates. The defensive exercise proved even more challenging than the morning's raid, as the opposing forces attacked with overwhelming numerical superiority that tested every aspect of the defending team's capabilities. Maria found herself running between positions, coordinating fires and movement while maintaining communications with higher headquarters. During the height of the simulated battle, she realized that the exhaustion had actually become an advantage. In some ways, her mind had stopped overthinking situations and was operating purely on training and instinct. The complex tactical problems that might have seemed overwhelming under normal circumstances were being solved through automatic responses, developed during months of preparation. Excellent situational awareness, Kumar told her as the exercise concluded. You were seeing things develop before I was, and your communications kept the whole team coordinated during the chaos. The compliment meant more to Maria than Kumar probably realized. Recognition from a Special Forces soldier with extensive combat experience validated her tactical thinking in ways that instructor praise couldn't match. She was earning respect not just for meeting standards, but for genuinely contributing to team success. Evening brought the psychological evaluation that many candidates considered the most challenging aspect of RASP-0. After 3 days of minimal sleep and maximum stress, each soldier faced a series of interviews and assessments designed to evaluate their mental stability and decision-making capabilities under extreme duress. Maria entered the evaluation room feeling like she was moving through quicksand. Her exhaustion was so complete that simple tasks like sitting down and responding to questions required conscious effort and deliberate focus. The interviewing psychologist, a major with extensive special operations experience, observed her condition with professional interest. How are you feeling right now? The major asked, his question deceptively simple, but loaded with implications for Maria's continued participation in the program. Tired, Maria replied honestly, knowing that attempting to minimize her condition would be both dishonest and tactically unwise. But functional. I can still perform assigned duties and make tactical decisions. The major made notes on his evaluation form, his expression revealing nothing about how her response was being assessed. Describe your decision-making process during this morning's leadership exercise. Walk me through how you selected the southern approach route. Maria's explanation was methodical and logical, despite her exhaustion. She outlined the tactical considerations that had influenced her planning, the risk assessment she had conducted, and the contingency measures she had developed. Her analysis demonstrated clear thinking and sound judgment, even under extreme stress. The psychological evaluation continued for nearly an hour, covering everything from her motivation for pursuing ranger training to her assessment of her own performance during the most challenging exercises. Throughout the interview, Maria maintained focus and provided thoughtful responses that demonstrated both self-awareness and tactical competence. Final question, the major said as the evaluation concluded. If you were to fail RASP 0 at this point, what would you do next? The question caught Maria off guard, not because she hadn't considered the possibility of failure, but because it forced her to articulate her long-term commitment to special operations despite the immediate challenges she was facing. I would return to my unit, continue training, and reapply when I was better prepared, she replied. This opportunity means too much to me to give up after one attempt. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. As Maria left the evaluation room, she realized that she had now survived the most psychologically demanding phase of RASP 0. 14 candidates remained, having lost 3 more soldiers during the sleep deprivation exercises. Each elimination reduced the competition, but also increased the pressure on those who remained. The next morning would bring the final phase of pre-assessment training, culminating in the 12-mile Ruck march that would determine final selection for Ranger School proper. Maria had demonstrated her capabilities across multiple domains, but the ultimate test of her preparation still lay ahead. The pre-dawn air hung thick with Georgia humidity as 14 candidates formed up for the final evolution of RASP 0. Maria's rucksack felt heavier than usual, loaded not just with the required 35 pounds, but with the weight of every doubt, every challenge, and every moment of preparation that had brought her to this point. In 6 hours, she would either be heading to Ranger School or returning to Fort Campbell with her dreams deferred indefinitely. Blake stood before the formation with a different energy than he had displayed during previous briefings. The casual intimidation and psychological pressure had been replaced by something approaching professional respect. These 14 soldiers had proven themselves capable of meeting Ranger standards, and now they would face the ultimate test of their preparation and determination. This 12-mile Ruck march will determine your final selection for Ranger School, Blake announced, his voice carrying clearly across the silent formation. The standard is simple. Complete the distance in under 3 hours while carrying a minimum 35-pound load plus your weapon and essential gear. Fall behind the pace vehicle, drop your ruck, or require medical assistance, and you're immediately eliminated from the program. Maria performed her final equipment check with methodical precision, ensuring that every strap was properly adjusted and every piece of gear was secured. Her rifle was slung across her chest in the carrying position. That would distribute its weight most efficiently during the long march ahead. Water bottles were positioned for easy access, and her pace count was mentally rehearsed to help maintain awareness of distance covered around her. The other candidates were conducting their own pre-march rituals. Kumar was stretching his hamstrings and adjusting his bootlaces with the practiced efficiency of someone who had completed countless similar events. Thompson was applying moleskin to his feet, having learned during previous Ruck marches where his boots tended to create pressure points. Davis was checking and rechecking his load distribution, his earlier arrogance replaced by focused preparation. The route will take you through some of Fort Benning's most challenging terrain, Blake continued. Hills, creek crossings, sand pits, and obstacles designed to test your ability to maintain pace under increasingly difficult conditions. Weather conditions are expected to deteriorate throughout the morning, with temperatures reaching the mid-90s and humidity approaching saturation levels. The weather forecast was particularly concerning for Maria, whose smaller body mass made her more susceptible to heat-related problems than larger candidates. She had learned during her preparation that proper hydration and electrolyte management would be crucial for maintaining performance as conditions became more challenging. Rodriguez appeared beside the formation, his presence adding gravity to an already serious moment. "I've been watching your progress for the past 2 weeks," he told the assembled candidates. "Each of you has demonstrated the basic capabilities required for Ranger training. But today we'll test something different, your ability to push beyond. What you think are your absolute limits when everything depends on continuing forward." His words carried particular weight for Maria, who understood that her performance today would be scrutinized, not just by the RASP-0 instructors, but by the broader, military community that was watching her attempt to break barriers in special operations. Success would open doors for other women who shared similar aspirations. Failure would provide ammunition for those who argued that physical standards shouldn't be compromised for the sake of integration. "Move out," Blake commanded, and the formation began moving through the darkness toward the starting point of their final challenge. The first mile served as a warm-up period, allowing candidates to settle into their individual rhythms and identify any equipment problems before they became serious issues. Maria positioned herself in the middle of the formation, close enough to the pace setters to avoid being caught behind slower candidates, but not so far forward that she would burn energy unnecessarily during the early stages. The trail was well maintained, dirt and gravel that provided good footing despite the darkness. Maria's night vision had adapted quickly, and she found herself moving with confidence despite the limited visibility. Her pace felt sustainable, and her breathing remained controlled as the formation moved through the pre-dawn quiet of the training area. Kumar maintained his position just ahead of her, his movement economical and smooth despite the challenging conditions. Behind her, she could hear Thompson's steady breathing and the rhythmic sound of his boots on the trail surface. The formation was moving well, with no indication of the struggles that would develop as distance and fatigue accumulated. The second mile brought the first significant terrain challenge as the route climbed steadily through rolling hills that tested each candidate's ability to maintain pace while working against gravity. Maria's legs began to feel the familiar burn of sustained effort, but her cardiovascular conditioning kept her breathing controlled and her movement efficient. Several candidates ahead of her began to spread out as individual fitness levels became apparent under the stress of loaded movement over challenging terrain. The soldier who had been setting the pace dropped back slightly, his breathing becoming more labored as the climb continued. Maria found herself moving closer to the front of the formation without consciously increasing her effort. The third mile featured the first constructed obstacle, a series of walls and barriers that required candidates to climb and maneuver while wearing their full packs. Maria's smaller size became an advantage as she navigated the obstacles with greater ease than larger candidates who struggled with the combination of height, weight, and equipment bulk. She watched Davis attack a wall climb with characteristic aggression, his superior upper body strength allowing him to power through the obstacle despite its challenging nature. But the effort was clearly costly, and she could see the strain in his movements as he resumed the march on the far side of the barrier. Thompson's approach was more methodical, using technique rather than pure strength to overcome the obstacles. His movements were efficient and controlled, suggesting that he was managing his energy expenditure effectively for the long distance that remained ahead. The fourth mile marked the point where individual preparation levels became obvious under the sustained stress of loaded movement. Two candidates began to fall noticeably behind the main formation, their movements becoming less efficient as fatigue accumulated and their ability to maintain the required pace deteriorated. Maria noticed that her own condition remained strong, despite the distance covered and challenges encountered. Her breathing was elevated but controlled, her legs felt solid beneath the load, and her mental focus remained sharp. The months of preparation with Rodriguez were proving their value under actual testing conditions. The fifth mile brought the water crossing that soaked every candidate and added the challenge of wet boots and additional weight to their existing fatigue. The creek was deeper than expected, reaching chest level at its deepest point and requiring candidates to hold their weapons and equipment above their heads while crossing. Maria's lighter weight was an advantage in the soft bottom conditions, allowing her to maintain better footing than larger candidates who sank deeper into the muddy creek bed. She crossed efficiently and resumed the march with minimal time lost, while several other candidates struggled with the unstable footing and swift current. As they emerged from the water crossing, one candidate was clearly in serious distress. His movements had become unsteady, and his breathing was labored beyond what the current pace should have required. Maria recognized the early signs of heat exhaustion, exacerbated by the high humidity and the additional stress of wet clothing. Sixth mile featured the steepest climb of the entire route, a sustained ascent that tested every candidate's ability to maintain pace, while fighting both gravity and accumulated fatigue. The trail surface was loose sand and gravel that made each step require maximum effort while providing minimal traction. Maria's technique training proved crucial as she maintained efficient movement up the challenging slope. She kept her steps short and quick, maintaining forward momentum while avoiding the longer strides that would have burned energy unnecessarily. Her pack felt heavier than it had at the start, but she knew that was normal as fatigue accumulated. Behind her, she could hear one candidate's breathing becoming increasingly labored and desperate. A quick glance back revealed that it was Williams, the soldier who had struggled during the 8-mile march earlier in the program. His face was pale despite the exertion, and she could see that he was fighting to maintain the minimum pace required to avoid elimination. The 7th mile brought a technical descent that tested balance and control while carrying unstable loads. The trail was steep and rocky, with loose surface material that made controlled movement difficult. Several candidates struggled with the combination of gravity, momentum, and pack weight that threatened to overwhelm their ability to maintain safe movement. Maria's mountain hiking experience served her well as she navigated the descent with confidence and efficiency. She used controlled slides and strategic bracing to manage her speed while maintaining the pace required to stay with the formation. The technique allowed her to conserve energy while other candidates fought against the challenging terrain. At the bottom of the descent, Blake called out the time check from the pace vehicle. 7 miles complete, 2 hours and 15 minutes elapsed. You're ahead of the required pace, but the final 5 miles include the most challenging terrain on the course. The announcement provided both encouragement and warning. The formation was making good time, but the most difficult challenges still lay ahead. Maria used the brief respite to assess her condition and adjust her equipment as needed for the final push to the finish line. The 8th mile introduced obstacles, specifically designed to test candidates who had managed to survive everything. Up to that point, a series of walls, trenches, and barriers required complex maneuvering while maintaining the pace necessary to complete the march within the time limit. Maria moved through the obstacles with increasing confidence. Her technique, refined by hours of practice, and her conditioning proving adequate for the sustained demands. She was no longer simply surviving the challenges. She was performing well relative to candidates with superior size and strength advantages. Kumar continued to move smoothly through the final obstacles, his special forces background evident in the efficiency of his movement. But even he was showing signs of fatigue, his breathing more labored than it had been during the early miles and his movements slightly less fluid than they had been at the start. The 9th mile featured another water crossing, this one through a swamp area that required candidates to wade through knee-deep water while maintaining their footing on an unstable bottom covered with fallen logs and hidden obstacles. The environment was hot, humid, and physically demanding in ways that tested every aspect of their preparation. Maria's lighter weight again proved advantageous as she moved through the swamp with greater stability than larger candidates who struggled with the soft footing and concealed obstacles. But the environment was taking its toll on everyone, and she could see the accumulated stress in the faces and movements of her fellow candidates. Williams was now clearly struggling to maintain the minimum pace. His movements had become mechanical and inefficient, and she could see that he was operating purely on determination rather than physical capability. Two other candidates were also showing signs of serious distress, their ability to continue increasingly questionable. The 10th mile brought the most challenging climb of the entire route, a steep ascent over rocky terrain that tested the absolute limits of each candidate's physical and mental reserves. The trail was barely visible in some sections, requiring careful navigation while maintaining pace and managing the increasingly heavy feeling of equipment loads. Maria's vision began to tunnel slightly as her body approached the limits of its energy reserves. Her legs felt heavy and unresponsive, and her pack seemed to have gained weight since the beginning of the march. But Rodriguez's mental training proved its value as she found the psychological resources to continue moving forward when every physical signal told her to stop. She could hear her own breathing becoming more labored, and she had to consciously focus on maintaining proper form and technique as fatigue threatened to compromise her movement efficiency. The summit of the climb seemed impossibly distant, but she forced herself to focus on immediate goals rather than the overwhelming distance that remained at the top of the climb. She paused briefly to catch her breath and assess the condition of other candidates. Several were clearly suffering, their faces showing the strain of extreme exertion and their movements becoming less controlled as exhaustion accumulated. The 11th mile featured a rapid descent followed by another climb, a combination that tested candidates' ability to recover from extreme exertion while immediately facing another challenging demand. The terrain was technical and demanding, requiring constant attention to footing and balance while maintaining forward progress. Maria's legs began to feel like concrete as the accumulated stress of 11 miles under load reached levels that challenged everything she had learned about her own capabilities. But she could see the finish area in the distance, marked by instructors and vehicles that represented the end of her RASP0 journey. The final mile seemed to stretch forever, each step requiring conscious decision-making as her body fought against continuing forward. But Maria could also sense something else. She was not just surviving the march, she was performing well. Relative to the other candidates who remained in the formation, Kumar was still moving strongly, but even his superior conditioning was being tested by the accumulated demands of 12 miles under challenging conditions. Thompson was maintaining pace but showing obvious signs of extreme fatigue. Davis was grimly determined but clearly suffering, with 500 meters remaining. Maria realized that she was actually in better condition than several candidates who had outweighed her by 50 or 60 pounds. Her preparation had been more thorough than she had realized, and her mental toughness was proving equal to the physical demands of the challenge. The finish line appeared ahead, marked by Blake and Rodriguez, with stopwatches and clipboards. Maria maintained her pace through the final 100 meters, crossing the line with enough energy remaining to suggest that she had managed her effort effectively throughout the march. 2 hours 37 minutes, Blake announced as Maria crossed the finish line. Outstanding performance. The time was more than 20 minutes faster than the required standard, placing Maria among the top performers in a group of candidates who had already demonstrated exceptional capabilities. More importantly, she had completed one of the most demanding physical challenges in the Army while carrying the same load and meeting the same standards as much larger soldiers. 11 candidates completed the march within the required time limit. Williams and 2 others were picked up by medical personnel after falling too far behind the required pace or showing signs of heat-related illness that made continued participation dangerous. Blake gathered the 11 remaining candidates in a semicircle around a weathered picnic table that had witnessed countless similar moments over the decades. The Georgia sun was climbing toward its midday peak, and sweat still dripped from every face despite the completion of the Ruck march 30 minutes earlier. Maria felt the familiar mixture of exhaustion and anticipation that came with approaching the end of a major milestone. "Congratulations," Blake began, his voice carrying a weight that suggested genuine respect rather than his usual professional distance. "You have successfully completed RASP 0. Each of you has demonstrated the basic physical, mental, and leadership capabilities required for Ranger School. However, completion of pre-assessment does not guarantee acceptance into the full program." Maria's stomach tightened as Blake's words reminded her that surviving RASP 0 was only the first hurdle in her journey toward earning the Ranger tab. The actual selection process would involve additional evaluations, medical examinations, and administrative reviews that could eliminate candidates for reasons beyond their performance during the past 2 weeks. The following soldiers have been selected for Ranger School Class 0324, which begins in 6 weeks at Fort Benning, Blake continued, consulting a manila folder that contained the fate of everyone present. "When I call your name, step forward. Kumar, Sergeant First Class." Kumar stepped forward with obvious relief, his Special Forces background and consistent performance throughout RASP 0 having made his selection virtually inevitable. His face showed satisfaction but not surprise. He had expected to succeed and had performed accordingly. Thompson Specialist. Thompson's massive frame seemed to shrink with relief as he joined Kumar in front of the formation. His struggle with some of the technical challenges had created doubt about his selection, but his consistent effort and strong finish on the Ruck march had apparently been sufficient. Rodriguez, Sergeant. The quiet soldier from Texas stepped forward with characteristic reserve, his steady performance throughout the program having earned him a slot despite never being the standout performer in any single event. Blake continued through the list with methodical precision. Jackson Specialist, Martinez Sergeant, Anderson Corporal. Each name brought visible relief to the selected candidate and increasing tension to those who remained unnamed. Davis Sergeant. Maria felt surprise at Davis's selection, given his inconsistent performance and leadership challenges during several exercises. But she recognized that the instructors had access to evaluation criteria beyond what candidates could observe, and Davis had demonstrated genuine capability despite his earlier attitude problems. Morrison Specialist, Williams Corporal. The selection of Williams was particularly surprising, given his struggles during both Ruck marches and several other events. But Maria understood that Ranger selection involved multiple factors, and perhaps Williams had shown improvement or potential that wasn't obvious to his fellow candidates. 9 names had been called, leaving only Maria and one other candidate, Sergeant Foster, standing in uncertainty. Foster was a solid performer who had completed every event without distinction, but also without significant failure. His selection seemed logical, but the mathematics were uncomfortable. If only 10 slots were available, one of them would be eliminated despite completing RASP 0 successfully. Blake looked up from his folder, his expression revealing nothing about the remaining selections. The silence stretched uncomfortably as Maria felt the weight of months of preparation and sacrifice hanging in the balance. Every doubt she had faced, every skeptical comment, every moment of physical and mental challenge had led to this moment. Foster. Sergeant. Foster stepped forward with obvious relief, his selection leaving Maria as the only candidate still awaiting Blake's decision. The isolation was psychological torture, creating doubt about her performance and selection status. Despite her strong finish on the final Ruck march, the remaining 10 selected candidates stood in a line facing Maria, their expressions mixing sympathy with their own relief at being chosen. She could see questions in their faces. Had she been eliminated despite her performance? Or was Blake simply following some predetermined order for announcing selections? Blake closed the folder and looked directly at Maria, his expression softening slightly from its usual professional mask. "Santos Staff Sergeant," he said finally, and Maria felt her knees nearly buckle with relief. Outstanding performance throughout the program. You've earned your slot through merit and determination. The words hit Maria like a physical blow, but one of pure joy and validation rather than pain. She stepped forward to join the other selected candidates, feeling for the first time since arriving at Fort Benning that she truly belonged among these soldiers. The whispers about standards being lowered or accommodations being made seemed insignificant compared to Blake's clear statement that she had earned her position through performance. Rodriguez appeared beside the formation, his presence adding weight to the moment. These 11 soldiers represent the best candidates we've seen in recent classes, he announced to the group. Your performance during RSP0 suggests that you have the potential to succeed in the full program, but I want to be absolutely clear about what lies ahead. He gestured toward a series of photographs mounted on a nearby bulletin board, showing previous Ranger classes in various stages of training. The images captured soldiers in states of extreme fatigue, pushing through obstacles that seemed designed to break human will rather than test military skills. Ranger School is 61 days of continuous evaluation under conditions that will test everything you think you know about your own capabilities, Rodriguez continued. The physical challenges you faced here are nothing compared to what awaits you. The mental pressure will be exponentially greater. The margin for error will be essentially non-existent. Maria listened to Rodriguez's words while processing the reality of her selection. She had achieved something that many had considered impossible, but the accomplishment was only the beginning of a journey that would be far more challenging than anything she had yet experienced. The attrition rate for Ranger School averages around 55%, Rodriguez continued. Soldiers who excelled in RASP0 will struggle and fail in the full program. Physical fitness, while necessary, is not sufficient for success. You will need mental toughness, leadership ability, technical competence, and the capacity to function effectively when everything in your body and mind is screaming at you to quit. Blake rejoined the briefing, his tone becoming more administrative as he outlined the next steps in their journey. You have 6 weeks to prepare for Ranger School. Use that time wisely. Your physical conditioning should continue to improve. More importantly, study the Ranger Handbook until you know it by memory. Practice your land navigation skills. Work on leadership techniques and small unit tactics. Maria absorbed every word of the preparation guidance, understanding that her selection for Ranger School was only meaningful if she could successfully complete the program. The next 6 weeks would be crucial for fine-tuning her preparation and addressing any remaining weaknesses that could cause failure during the actual course. Report to Building 4, Room 201 for administrative processing, Blake concluded. Medical examinations, security clearance verification, and final paperwork completion. Any issues discovered during administrative processing can result in elimination from the program, so ensure all your documentation is current and accurate. As the formation dispersed, Maria found herself walking alongside Kumar toward the administrative building. The Special Forces soldier had been one of her few allies during RASP0, and she valued his perspective on what lay ahead. How are you feeling about the selection? Kumar asked as they climbed the steps to the administrative building. Relieved, Maria replied honestly, but also terrified about what comes next. Everything I've heard about Ranger School suggests that RASP0 was just a warm-up exercise. Kumar nodded thoughtfully. The physical challenges will be significantly harder, but the biggest difference is the psychological pressure. In RSP0, they were evaluating whether you belonged in the program. In Ranger School, they'll be trying to break you to see if you have what it takes to lead Rangers in combat. His words were sobering but not discouraging. Maria had spent months preparing for exactly this type of challenge, and she felt confident in her ability to withstand psychological pressure while maintaining performance standards. The administrative Processing took several hours, involving medical examinations, paperwork reviews, and briefings on the expectations and requirements for Ranger School students. Each step reinforced the reality that she was now committed to a program that would test every aspect of her character and capability. Dr. Patricia Myers, the physician conducting medical evaluations, was particularly thorough in her assessment of Maria's physical condition. "Your cardiovascular fitness is exceptional," Dr. Myers noted as she reviewed test results. "Strength levels are adequate for the program requirements. My primary concern is your body mass index. You're at the lower end of acceptable parameters for the sustained caloric demands of Ranger training." The medical concern was not unexpected, but it highlighted a challenge that Maria would need to address during her preparation period. Maintaining adequate nutrition and body weight during Ranger school would require careful planning and aggressive caloric intake to prevent the kind of weight loss that could compromise her performance. "I'll work with a nutritionist to develop a weight gain strategy," Maria replied. "My goal is to add 8 to 10 pounds of lean mass before the program begins." Dr. Myers approved the plan and cleared Maria for participation, but her warnings about the physical demands of the program reinforced the need for Maria to optimize every aspect of her preparation during the remaining weeks. The security clearance review was routine, confirming that Maria's background investigation was current and that no issues existed that would prevent her from accessing classified information during Ranger training. The administrative officer conducting the review seemed impressed by her military record and the endorsements from her chain of command. "Your preparation for this program has been exceptional," the officer noted. "The letters of recommendation from your superiors at Fort Campbell suggest that you've been preparing systematically for special operations for quite some time." The comment reminded Maria of the support network that had made her selection possible. Rodriguez's mentorship, Williams's guidance, and even Colonel Hayes's tough questions had all contributed to her readiness for this opportunity. As the administrative processing concluded, Maria found herself standing outside Building 4 with her Ranger School acceptance packet in hand. The official documentation made her selection feel real in a way that Blake's announcement had not. She was no longer hoping to become a Ranger candidate. She was a Ranger candidate, with all the opportunities and pressures that status entailed. Thompson approached as she reviewed her paperwork, his expression mixing congratulation with concern. "This is huge," he said simply. "But I hope you understand what you're getting into. The scrutiny on you is going to be intense." Maria nodded, understanding that Thompson was trying to prepare her for the reality that her performance would be watched not just by instructors, but by the broader military community. Success would break barriers and create opportunities for other women. Failure would provide ammunition for those who opposed integration of special operations forces. "I understand the stakes," she replied, "but I'm not doing this to make a political statement. I'm doing it because I believe I can succeed and contribute meaningfully to Ranger missions." The distinction was important to Maria, who had always focused on personal excellence rather than symbolic achievements. But she also recognized that her success or failure would have implications beyond her individual career, and that responsibility added weight to an already challenging endeavor. As evening approached, the selected candidates gathered for a final meal at the base dining facility before departing for their respective units. The conversation was subdued, reflecting both satisfaction at their selection and apprehension about the challenges ahead. 6 weeks goes by fast, Davis commented, his earlier hostility toward Maria having been replaced by professional respect. "We need to use every day to get stronger and sharper." Maria agreed completely, already planning the intensified preparation regimen she would follow during the interim period. The next 6 weeks would determine whether her selection for Ranger School would translate into successful completion of the program and achievement of her ultimate goal. 6 weeks later, Maria stood at the starting line of the Ranger Schools. Infamous 12-mile Ruck march, her heart pounding with anticipation. The Georgia morning air was thick with humidity, and 37 candidates lined up beside her, each carrying the regulation 35-pound pack that would separate the determined from the defeated. "Standard is 3 hours, the ranger instructor barked. "Santos, you're setting pace today." Maria's stomach dropped. Setting pace meant leading the entire formation, with every eye watching her performance. As the smallest candidate in Ranger school history, she knew this moment would define not just her future, but the future of women in special operations. The whistle shrieked, and Maria stepped forward into legend. 11 miles in, with her legs screaming and her lungs burning, Maria maintained her relentless pace. Behind her, candidates twice her size were falling back, struggling to match the rhythm she had set. Rodriguez's training had prepared her for this moment. When the body wanted to quit, the mind had to take control. As she crested the final hill with 800 meters remaining, Maria could see the finish line ahead. But more importantly, she could hear something that made her heart soar, the sound of 36 pairs of boots, still following her lead. She crossed the finish line at 2 hours and 38 minutes, shattering the previous course record by 7 minutes while leading every single candidate to a successful completion. The instructor stood speechless as Maria turned to face her formation, exhausted but victorious. "Rangers lead the way," she said simply. 3 months later, Staff Sergeant Maria Santos became the first woman to earn the Ranger tab, proving that courage isn't measured in pounds or inches, but in the size of one's heart and the strength of one's will. What incredible story of determination would you like to hear next? Hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments what inspires you most about overcoming the impossible.